President, I ask consent to speak in morning business.
Without objection.
Madam President, plow through this nomination. That's what the Republican Majority Leader said over the weekend. We're going to plow through this nomination of Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. It doesn't sound to me like a recipe for fairness, and it certainly doesn't sound like a recipe for getting to the truth. Plow through. That was what the Republican Majority Leader said the Republican majority would do. I was surprised when this all started by a spokesman for President Trump, Kellyanne Conway, not noted for her moderation, made a very, I thought, moderate and thoughtful statement at the beginning of the consideration of Dr. Ford's charges. She said, "We are neither going to ignore or insult Dr. Ford." I thought that was a good standard. Unfortunately, since she said that, neither the President nor many Republican leaders have lived up to it. I really come to this as a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee trying to think about the gravity of the situation and what is fair. In this situation, we have Dr. Ford coming forward. I thought long and hard, and I've talked to many of my staffers and friends back home about her motivation. What in the world does she have to gain by putting herself and her family through this? What's at the end of it for her? I can't see any positives other than the satisfaction that she is pursuing what she believes to be true. She's exposing herself to ridicule, harassment, attack, even by the President of the United States in his tweets. Her family's in danger and they've had to move out of their homes. Their computers have been hacked. She's had to engage attorneys and get into lengthy negotiations with the Republicans in the Senate just for a chance to come and tell her story. This woman, who had a family and a life, well respected by her colleagues and people in her community, have turned it upside down. Why? What is in this for Dr. Ford? What is she trying to achieve here? The more I've thought about it, the more I've concluded that she just believes that it's so critically important for the American people to hear her story, to understand what she believes to be true about this nominee. And so I come to this certainly with an open mind in terms of her presentation. And when I hear the Republican leader come to the floor and talk about her situation, he zigs and zags. One moment he sounds like he's sympathetic to Dr. Ford and what she's been through, calling for fairness. And then, before he catches a breath, he calls her charges unsubstantiated smear. I would say to my colleague from Kentucky, you can't have it both ways. You can't be respectful of Dr. Ford and the reason she comes to Washington and then dismiss and discredit everything she said as a smear. You just can't have it both ways, but he tries, and he's tried for 2 straight days. He argues that this situation that we face has been carefully choreographed by the Democrats. Well, there's the old cliche by Will Rogers about I don't belong to any organized political party, I'm a Democrat. It certainly applies to this situation because this has been an unusual development. Senator Dianne Feinstein receives a letter from Dr. Ford through a member of Congress, Anna Eshoo. When she receives the letter, it says at the top, confidential. I don't want my identity to be disclosed. And Senator Feinstein has told me and others over and over again, she felt duty-bound not to victimize Dr. Ford, who was claiming to have been victimized already. And she tried. She tried to find a way to get to the bottom of this, to establish whether Dr. Ford's charges were accurate, credible. And after weeks of trying, she came to the conclusion she couldn't do it. She couldn't do it through the United States Senate and through the resources available to her. She spoke to Dr. Ford. She took the charge seriously. She was in communication with her attorneys. She tried her best to find a way to establish the credibility of these charges before moving forward, always constrained by Dr. Ford's admonition, don't let my identity become public. and that's why it took longer than it should. Now, Senator McConnell has come to the floor 2 straight days and somehow has suggested that the Democrats leaked this letter to the press. Well, I don't have any knowledge of that whatsoever. And I do know, as far as Senator Feinstein was concerned, she was scrupulous in making certain that the identity of Dr. Ford be protected as long as she wanted it protected. So I don't know what he is saying or whether he has information to back up these charges which he's made for 2 straight days on the floor. I take a look at this situation and I understand where we are today. Bottom line, Dr. Ford had nothing to gain by doing this, nothing, and still has nothing to gain. But then there is one overriding fact here which Senator McConnell continues to ignore. Let me take you back in history. 27 years ago was the Clarence Thomas hearing. I was in the House at the time, but I read about it, followed it as most Americans did. The very day that Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Joe Biden received the letter from Anita Hill charging sexual misconduct against Clarence Thomas, that same day, Chairman Biden sent the letter to the President, George W. Bush White House, to the White House counsel C. Boyden Gray, the same day, and C. Boyden Gray, the White House counsel, that very day ordered the Federal Bureau of Investigation to investigate the charges by Anita Hill. Now, there's been a lot of comment on whether or not that investigation was adequate or peremptory. There's been a lot more comment on whether the following hearing was fair, adequate, and not peremptory. But the fact is, the instinct of Joe Biden and the instinct of the George H.W. Bush White House was the same. Investigate it. Don't assume it's true. Don't assume it's false. Now look at this case. Look at where we are today. Despite repeated requests of the White House and the Republicans for the Federal Bureau of Investigation to look into this matter, despite repeated requests of them to ask the FBI to do this, they've refused. The Republicans refuse an investigation of the charges by Dr. Ford. Dr. Ford has called for the FBI to investigate her own charges. They refuse. If they truly believed that there was no evidence, no witness to back up the charges of Dr. Ford, wouldn't they obviously have called the FBI and said, do your job, find what you can, and we are confident at the end that Judge Kavanaugh will be exonerated? But they haven't. They haven't. And despite all the calls for fairness over and over again by Senator McConnell, fairness would dictate that a nonpartisan investigative group like the FBI look into this matter and come to conclusions, whatever they may be. I listened, as Senator McConnell said this morning. Justice matters, he said. Evidence matters, he said. Facts matter, he said. I might add, an FBI investigation matters too, because it would get to the bottom of all 3 of those things. And yet, the White House, the President, Senator McConnell, and Republicans have resisted this FBI investigation, despite Dr. Ford asking for it. As far as the presumption of innocence, I listened to Senator McConnell say that someone suggested that Judge Kavanaugh is not entitled to that. I disagree with whomever said that. Both Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh are entitled to a presumption of innocence. The case has to be proven. The facts have to be shown as best they can. But I want to add something else, too. I'm troubled by what President Trump said over the weekend about Dr. Ford's charges. The suggestion it's been so long that her charges are not credible. The suggestion that if they were truly credible, she would have told her parents what happened that night in that bedroom. And her parents would have reported to law enforcement. We could read the police reports. That's not the real world when it comes to this kind of sexual harassment and sexual violence. Not at all. It's the reason it took 40 years for altar boys in the Catholic Church to come forward and finally tell their story. It's the reason why many women who have been the victims never come forward. It's hard, it's difficult, it's painful, it's divisive. And many of them step away from it and carry those memories for a lifetime without ever telling anyone. If you want to be fair to Dr. Ford, and you want to be fair to the victims of sexual violence, harassment, assault, then you've got to acknowledge the obvious. This is something which no one wishes on any member of their family, friend, or person that they've met. And if it occurs, in fairness, we should be sensitive to the fact that many don't want to come forward at all, and some only do it reluctantly much later. I want a fair and open hearing this Thursday when both Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh come before us. This is not a smear campaign. As far as I'm concerned, Dr. Ford, with nothing to gain, has stepped forward and told her story. She has subjected her family and her name to the kind of publicity which no one would wish on their family. And she's done it because she believes the truth is important. By the same token, Judge Kavanaugh is entitled to tell his story, and I hope he will. He will have to explain to this committee why he didn't call for a Federal Bureau of Investigation effort on his own behalf to establish the facts, the evidence, the witnesses, if there were any. He didn't, and that is a fact. We also know that this charge that Senator McConnell made, that Senator Schumer made up his mind on the Kavanaugh nomination early, is true in some respects. Senator Schumer announced his position on this nomination early. But if you've been listening to the speeches given by Senator McConnell on the floor from the start, you certainly know where his vote's been. He says he's looking forward to hearing the testimony on Thursday. Well, clearly he's made up his mind before he hears that testimony. So to fault Senator Schumer for taking a position on this nomination early, he's ignoring the obvious. So did Senator McConnell. I will say at this point that we face an awesome responsibility. A nation divided politically, a nation where people have strong feelings on both sides, in an effort to find the truth. I don't know what the legal standard is for this hearing. We certainly know when it comes to criminal law, the matter of probable cause, which leads to investigation and prosecution, and beyond a reasonable doubt to prove the guilt of someone. We know on the civil side there are different standards. No one has quite spelled out what our standard of proof is. But this much I know, no one, not any single American, is entitled to a seat on the Supreme Court. They've got to come before the American people first, and certainly the Senate under the Constitution, and make their case for the advice and consent of the Senate to that nomination. It's a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the land. The person who fills that seat can make decisions which swing history one way or the other, decisions which affect justice and privacy and fairness in American life. And for that reason, all of us, all the members of the Senate, certainly the Senate Judiciary Committee, have to take them seriously. I'm going to take this very seriously, and I hope members on both sides of the aisle will. And I also want to say this. Senator McConnell followed up with his plow through this matter comment and told us we'll stay through the weekend if necessary to get this done. We've got to get it behind us. We've got to move on. Where was Senator McConnell's sense of urgency when the vacancy was created by the death of Anton Scalia? For almost a year, Senator McConnell left that seat vacant in the hopes that a Republican would be elected president. The idea now of giving a few days to go through the evidence, to go through an investigation, to have a reasonable review of the record of Judge Kavanaugh now is pushed away. This has to be done, and it has to be done this weekend, and that's it. Why? Why the urgency, Senator McConnell? Shouldn't we value fairness over urgency? I asked Senator McConnell, set your plow aside for a few minutes, would you? Take a look at the Senate, this deliberative body, and make sure that in fairness to both Dr. Ford and to Judge Kavanaugh, we don't push this through and we don't rush to judgment. Let us use our opportunity in the Senate and our responsibility in the Senate to treat our constitutional requirements seriously. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.